Sometime later, the island reached a temple, which was on top of a floating island, and the only way to go up was by using the magical steps, which were floating. This was the Takeishu Temple. The participants began to talk among themselves. They were going to become very strong this time, since previously in the Magic City there was a legendary sealed king who had become king here in one step. And not only that, even he had become one of the 3 invincibles of Great Summer. Moreover, he wasn't the only one, since the Great Dreamer had also attained enlightenment here. In the temple, there were some beautiful mountains. It had a trial called the Hall of Great Emptiness. There were 3 levels. On the first one there were 8 steps. Each time someone climbed a step, there was a chance to receive a heavenly reward. Fu Kaishin, who had one hand behind his back, extended the other towards the temple, and explained that the second level was called the Steel of Great Void. The Great Dreamer was the only person who had managed to reach this level. As for the third level, it was inside the temple. No one so far had managed to enter. This was going to be the last test. People. The first 10 were going to be selected according to the number of steps they climbed to represent the Jiangnan War Zone and enter the general final of geniuses from the 8 main war zones of Daxia. Once he finished explaining this, the temple test began. Everyone got excited, started smiling, and began running towards the steps. With a smile full of excitement, Luo Sando also started running. But Zhang grabbed her by the shoulder, stopped her, and said it wasn't good to be in such a hurry since the temple wasn't going anywhere. Unlike the others, Tang Yin, Bai Feng, and another boy sat on the ground, put their hands together, and began to meditate. Jiang slightly turned his head back, and with a serious look asked Luo Sando to watch carefully since none of them were in a hurry, and they were all meditating to adjust their mental state. Luo Sando thought Zhang was right, so she, Mu Henkyu, and Zhang sat on the ground, put their hands together, and began to meditate. Mu Henkyu mentioned that in a place like the Takesu Temple, each person could only ascend once, so it was better to adjust their mental state to the maximum before ascending. Hong Yao sat on top of her spear and it began to fly. Go Kaishin, who was standing on top of the spear, put his arms behind his back, started observing them, and upon seeing that they could remain calm without haste, he couldn't help but praise them. Zhang started to look up and decided to copy the skill of the Heavenly Sword King before climbing the steps. To prevent the copy card from becoming invalid, he began with the skill copying, hoping that the old man had not deceived him. Gu Kaishin started to stare at others and a system window appeared as a target to copy. Zhang selected Gu Kaishin. The system warned him that there was a possibility that the copied skill could degrade or improve during the process. After this warning, it asked him if he wished to start copying a random skill. Zhang began to stare at Gu Kaishin and responded with a yes, thinking that it was time to start with this. He hoped to have a little more luck. He did not ask to improve his skills, he just wanted them not to degrade. Another system window appeared to inform him that the skill he was copying was called Opening of the Sky. It was of legendary quality. He stood up and couldn't help but feel somewhat surprised and alert at the same time. He felt relieved since the old man hadn't deceived him and this move really existed. The skill card began to copy Gu Kaishin's skill and suddenly Zhang was teleported to another place. He started to inspect the place and couldn't help but be shocked, and it didn't take long for him to realize where he was. A sword appeared in his hands, swinging it with precision and strength, cutting through space and time. Zhang was perplexed as this force was the same that Gu Kaishin had with the sword. Zhang was in a forest and he was shirtless. He grabbed the sword tightly, began to observe the blade with a confused look, and started to wonder why he was practicing with the sword. While the leaves were falling, with a look full of determination, he swung the sword and cut the leaf in half. Then he raised the sword above his head, although it seemed that not much time had passed. Zhang had even grown a beard. He raised the sword to the sky and a powerful blizzard began to form around the blade. He used all his strength and launched a powerful slash towards the ground. His attack was so powerful that it split the mountains in half. Zhang already had long hair and a long white beard. He had become an old man. While with one hand he was holding the sword. With a tired look, he began to look to one side and thought that man follows the earth follows the sky, and he follows the Tao. The progress of skill copying reached 120% and he obtained several skills. The first was called Man's Strength of Purple Quality, the second was called Earth Knife of Purple Quality, the third was called Sky Knife of Legendary Quality, and the last was called Great Path Power of Shadow Knife Quality. Zhang, who was sitting on the ground and was meditating, was somewhat surprised. He had incredible luck, since not only had he copied everything, he had also broken down the celestial sword into 4 styles. With a calm look, Hong Yao explained to Gu Kaishen that Zhang Wuxiang and the others had already started climbing and only Zhang remained here, adding that at the beginning of the test is when benefits were given. She did not know what had happened to Zhang and if he had fallen asleep. Gu Kaishen started to look at Zhang and remained thinking in silence. Several minutes passed and Zhang, Luo Sando, and Mu Henkyu continued meditating without moving. Seeing this, Gu Kaishen thought that this was a bit strange since adjusting the state did not take so much time. Hong Yao's spear began to tremble. Witnessing this, she couldn't help but be shocked and go on alert. She asked the master why her spear's heart was resonating. Gu Kaishen's eyes filled with surprise and he began to look at Zhang. The celestial sword beneath the island also started to tremble and he revealed to her that not only was her spear resonating, but even the heart of his sword was resonating. Upon hearing this, Hong Yao panicked. She didn't know if Zhang had succeeded. Back then, it was also a rare talent, but her mind was inflexible. She had always wanted to break down the celestial sword, saying that it could be divided into 4 movements, which had led her to be stuck at the master level for so many years of cultivation. She couldn't believe that finally someone had a revelation now. Gu Kaishen started to stare at Zhang and realized that the sensation that had just appeared and disappeared was very familiar. He couldn't believe this was happening, and thought it was a divine illusion produced by the temple. Hong Yao was somewhat surprised, and she asked the master to pay attention since Zhang had begun to move towards the steps. Zhang started to walk towards the steps, and Hong Yao became somewhat nervous as she did not know which step he would be able to reach. She had tried very hard and had only managed to reach step 301, and Jiegang was even worse as he had only managed to reach step 298. She did not know how the great dreamer had reached the top. According to her, this was terrifying. At that moment, a list appeared in the sky. The invincible descendant Zhang Huashuang had reached step 289. The little god killer of the East Sea Bai Feng had reached step 253. The Tianji killer named Lu Tanging had reached step 248. The young master of the city of 10,000 demons Lazy had reached step 211. Mu Henkyu had reached step 199 and Luo Sando had reached step 170. The participants began to converse among themselves. If they had known they were going to come to the temple, they would have prepared mind potions. The first 100 steps were tests of illusions, and the following steps were even more difficult. Each step was going to feel like carrying several mountains. One of them drew attention from others and asked them to be quiet since the poisonous demon Zhang was about to start climbing. Assuming that surely he was going to be another Zhang Huashuang, Zhang started to look at the ground and remained silent. Then he approached the step, lifted his foot, and with a determined look thought that if the first steps were tests of illusions, with his mental strength there should be no problem. Once he stepped on the first step, his eyes filled with surprise and he couldn't help but be shocked and go on alert. At that moment, Xiao Beiheng's grandfather appeared. While his eyes were shining, he began to unsheathe the sword with one hand, and with a suffocating look decided to finish him off without leaving him a place to be buried, since he couldn't believe that he had dared to mess with the legitimate grandson of the Xia family. Zhang panicked and began to wonder if he was Xiao Zhengguo. He unsheathed the sword, leaped forward and prepared to attack. Seeing this, Zhang started covering his head with his arms and prepared to defend himself. Due to the difference in strength, Zhang's body was sent flying backward, and he fell on his butt against the ground. At that moment, Jiegang and the others appeared in front of him to protect him. Zhang, who was behind them, panicked and asked them to flee from here. In the blink of an eye, Xiao Zhengguo moved at an incredible speed and using the sword, cut their bodies into pieces, approached Zhang and with a look full of hatred decided to finish off anyone who stood in his way. The blood of Jiegang and the others fell on Zhang's face, and seeing that they were dead, he couldn't help but be terrified. He climbed completely onto the step, and while his body was trembling, he began to cry. Huang Yao and Gu Kaixin approached the little, and upon witnessing this, she began to wonder if little Zhang had gotten stuck on the first step. But Gu Kaixin explained that this step tested the four-dimensional system: spirit, physicality, agility, and strength. All the prodigies of the camp had been tempered from a young age with celestial materials and earthly treasures, but Zhang was the only self-taught one. In this trial, he was going to suffer a great disadvantage. Upon hearing this, she panicked because if Zhang lost, then the god of war would send him to the battlefield. Back to the test, Xiao Zhengguo defeated Zhang, who was now on his knees on the ground. He accepted defeat and was willing to die since anyway he had harmed everyone and no longer wanted to live. At that moment, a white branch appeared around Xiao Zhengguo's sword. Zhang began to raise his head and couldn't help but wonder what was happening. A white branch pierced through Xiao Zhengguo's body, causing him to gradually begin to disappear. Zhang, who was kneeling, started observing this and couldn't help but wonder if this was the illusory world. Now that Xiao Zhengguo had been defeated, Zhang left the illusory world. He couldn't believe that he had just fallen into an illusion, but it felt too real. But then he thought that it couldn't be real. Uncle Jiagang and the others had been killed, and instead of fighting for his life, he had been seeking death. He clenched his fist tightly and while blushing, prepared to step onto the next step. Seeing this illusory world mocking him, he called upon the spiritual tree and decided to give it a good beating. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part,